Hello, hello to all. Happy Friday to you. And if you're watching the replay, good day. I'm Jevon Wooden. It's been a while since I've gone live. Today, I'm excited about this topic. We're talking about change management done right from an HR perspective. And I have a very special guest. I'm going to let him introduce himself because he can do it better than I can. So go ahead and introduce yourself, brother.
Hello, my name is Darrell Frencher Crusan. I'm the head of HR at Octapharma Plasma Inc., and we are a pharmaceutical manufacturing company, and our primary resource is really the collection of plasma. And plasma, we have over 183 centers across 37 states in the United States. And the one thing that's super important to know about what we do each and every day is that plasma is used to create life-saving medicines that we distribute to over 118 countries across the world.
Wow. I mean, the work is important. That means also that change is probably a constant in your arena. So we got the right person to be talking about change from your HR standpoint. So before we get into
Never, we
that,
never do
Darrell,
change.
right? It never happens, right?
Never happens.
So let's talk about this. We're talking about change management from an HR perspective. Why is that topic important to you?
Yeah, I mean, Javon, if you think about it, change is going to happen. And I think, in my very short, not really sure, I'm just joking, 25-year history, in a variety of different roles, what I would tell you is that change is happening at a much faster pace than I think I've ever seen it happen before. I think with new technologies, kind of the current environment of competition, things of that nature, and change affects all things, not just technology, but more importantly, people. And it's so important that if we want to drive the right type of sustainable investments that really achieve our ROIs, we have to be cognizant of the fact of what is the impact of change on people and how do we get them ready for it so that they can sustain the level of change that's needed to really drive value into the organization.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a hot topic right now, technology. And a
Yeah.
lot of people are fearful of what technology will do to their task and drills and what they're assigned to do. So, from your perspective, Darrell, how do you see the change, the rate of change, whether it be economic, whether it be competition, technology? How do you prepare your people for that?
Yeah, I mean, and there's no right answer. I think there's several different ways to look at it, but I think first and foremost, what I tell my teams and as as search I support my organization is I think we have to be intellectually curious, right? I mean, I think I've heard from colleagues and other individuals in regards to AI and the technology changes that are out there. And these are types of things that I think we just have to embrace and seek to understand how we might use it and not run away from it because the reality is it's going to happen. And so I think first and foremost, it's one, embrace it, seek to understand it, learn it, and then really start to think simply like how could I use this level of technology in what I do each and every day. The one thing I would tell you about the things that I personally am experiencing is the value of things like AI makes me more efficient, but it
Hmm.
allows me to be thinking a little bit more critical about the work that I'm doing. And I think really being able to create a space and comfort level with our employee base and just in general in the communities around, technology is a good thing. And it allows us to take care of some things that are kind of rote tasks that allows you to do more critical thinking, which can add more value to the organization. And Javon, I think the other piece that's really important to really kind of highlight is at the core of what any person does in their work, it's really about how do we use the tools to add value to the organization. And that's, really a key concept that's critical.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting it spot on, Darrell. It's like a lot of change initiatives fail. It's been said that it's been 77% for like over 20 plus years. That stat came out, and it's still the same, maybe even worse right now. And I've been dealing with a lot of organizations trying to help them through change. And what I've noticed is a lot of the change adaption. It's not because the change is necessarily bad, but a lot of the people, they kind of feel like they get blindsided by the change. And you know what's interesting is the organization, they may send out communications over the course of a span of a year, but then everyone still feels blindsided. So what would be some of your suggestions for how to like kind of prepare your teams for that impending change? Because let's
Yeah.
be honest here, change is necessary if you do want to stay in competition, right? If within your industries.
Yeah, Jevon, it's interesting because in all of the organizations I work for, this has been a common challenge, right? It's not the change itself, it's really the adoption. It's the readiness and the adoption, right? And so some of the best practices that, I've seen and been a part of really first start with keeping the end user in mind, right?
Mhm.
If you think about the volume of changes that could potentially occur in the course of a time period, taking a step back and starting to think about who are your end users and what is that volume of change? How do we need to think about how do we deliver that change and the capacity in which they could actually really consume it? And so, in some of the best organizations that I worked in, they've really taken that into strong consideration to really be thoughtful around, we have a certain amount of capacity that we set for each kind of month or quarter of what we're going to drive. And you think about at the top of the house, as it starts to go into that funnel, being really intentional about two different things. One being, when should we deploy this change based on the capacity that someone can consume it, which is your end user. But the other piece, which is equally, if not most important, which is how do we make sure that for the leaders of those people that we're preparing them to be able to truly understand what we need them to do to help execute the change. You can get feedback from the recipients of change to say, I found out about the change the same time as my team, and I'm supposed to do something with that. Well, how do you drive adoption if you're not really preparing your leaders in a way to be able to support that change? And I know it sounds really basic, but the reality is that in the course of a day, a common employee is a normal employee is actually dealing with multiple things. So
Mhm.
how do you really make sure you're taking in consideration the fact that if this is a sizable change that needs to happen, how do we make sure we bake that into their day in a way that's meaningful for them? And that's also how do we think about, is it a communication? Is it a training? Is it multiple trainings that need to happen over several weeks to really drive that adoption? And then lastly, how do we then measure to ensure that the efficacy of that change has really occurred? And so it's not like just drop the change and then move on, but it's
Right.
really being intentional to go back and say, are we receiving the outcomes that we had expected based on the investment and the time and the energy we put into these changes?
Now you said something very important, Darrell. You talked about keeping the end user in mind. And a lot of the changes I'm seeing is, leaders trying to move a little too quickly on a change. And for example, AI. A lot of folks, they use AI as a broad term and they're like, we got to get AI into our organization, but they don't really understand what that means for the end user or the person implementing the change. So I love that you said getting feedback for the person that's going to help carry this thing out and the people, the employees who are going to be impacted, because there's something that is often missed. And you said it's basic, but foundation is the key to us all, right? A lot of us
Yeah,
skip these steps of letting them know how it's going to impact them and why the change is necessary in the first place. And
yeah,
those two things are often missed in those communications. And I love that you said, we need to figure out what's the best way to roll out the change. And that's kind of that first principles thinking type of ideations. Like, let's break this down to the smallest sample size so they can understand their specific perspective, from their perspective, how it's going to impact them in their daily operations. Because really,
yeah,
that fear is was impacting the adoption, the fear of uncertainty of how it's going to change them. Will they have a job, in a couple of months when
yeah.
this change is adopted? So, how do you like go about letting people know why and how it impacts them and within your organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've answered it really. I think and let me just back up and say one thing. I think leaders, and I'm guilty of it too, I think you have good intentions about what you're trying to accomplish
Mhm.
to drive the change. And to your point, there is a level of intentionality that you must have to say, how do we make sure that we even test this out with a few stakeholders that is going to be impacted, just to say, how is this landing with you? What concerns would you have as part of this rollout? To be able to really customize the message in a way that will really resonate and really make sure you're not missing anything. So I think it's good intentions from all to try to deliver, but it's always kind of that important piece of just saying, like, hold on, before we actually implement, let's just do a sanity check to make sure that this is resonating from that perspective. And
Mm.
Jevon, do you mind repeating your other question?
Yeah, just how do you convey the how and the why of it all to those different levels, for example?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's part of kind of what I just stated, which is I think if you
Hmm.
go out to some of those stakeholders and say, hey, here's what we're looking to accomplish, here's why we're trying to do it. From your perspective, how is this change going to impact you? And what are some things that we're missing that we need to fill in the blanks? And I would tell you, many of the organizations I've been with, we've done employee engagement surveys. The state the why is always a big opportunity, and always just being intentional to say why. And what are the five whys? Because I think if you start saying, well, why, it starts to get down to the crux of what we're trying to deliver, which is what people really want to understand.
Yeah,
And Javon, I also
absolutely.
think the other piece too that's important is kind of that two-way communication, and not only allowing the information to go down to the end user, but to also have a very open channel of communication so that if that message did get there and there's more questions, creating that avenue for folks to come back to you so that then you can address what you may have missed. Because let's be honest, we are not going to get it perfect 100% of the time, every single time. We're
No.
just trying to do our very best.
Yeah, and I love that you said getting that feedback and giving the channel up, so they can say, "Hey, here's what we're seeing from our standpoint. Here's what may make this better. Did you all consider this? Because leaders can't see it all." And I love that you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned like having those stakeholders have representation throughout that change. And some organizations call them change champions, where they
Mm-hmm.
have different levels. You have your managers, you have different department representation and all that in the room as the change is being discussed. But that can get tough too, because then you start having all these different perspectives and standpoints. So it's like, at what point do we just say, hey, we got to do this? I hear you, but we're going to go this route, right? So what do you think about that standpoint? It's like, okay, we can listen, but at what point do we just say we got to make this decision?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it basically, you're never going to make every single person happy. You're just not, right? However, you can seek to understand their perspective and how you might be able to address what their concerns may be. But the reality is that we are in an organization, we're managing a business, and it's important for us to drive the necessary changes. And we're just not ever going to make every single person happy. But I think we do have an opportunity to be able to, like, understand what the potential concerns are from all stakeholders and try to address it the best way possible. But at the end of the day, sometimes it does mean we just need to move forward because there is some solid rationale as to why we need to do that.
Awesome. Now, and I just got to ask. I know that the audience is listening, like, oh, Darrell really knows his stuff on change. So, when you know you have a big organizational change coming up, do you have like a framework or process you typically kind of work through as you're implementing that change?
I just shoot from the hip, be like, let's just try it.
Let's do it.
Generally, yes. I mean, I think it's, I think the big piece of it for me and just some of my experiences has been really trying to do some of the legwork on the front end to truly kind of understand some of the things that we talked about is, what are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish? How do we know if we're successful? Really taking a step back, understanding who are the key stakeholders that are going to be impacted by this, and who are the stakeholders that need to support some of these changes. And then really just methodically working with key stakeholders through the details. And the one thing that I've come to appreciate about just driving change is that I alone cannot do change by myself, right? That I need to bring the representation of a team together to really kind of drive the best possible solutions. And it's not all at the senior level, to be honest with you. It's really getting a good representation of folks that can help drive this change come from various levels of the organizations, because you learn things and you incorporate things that I would not know of, but that is super critically important. And I found that the best change efforts that happen have those diverse teams with different perspectives that allow us to put the best plans in place and to drive the right level of sustainment.
Mm. You said a word right there, and you kept going. It's a theme here that you keep bringing up, and that's the theme of ensuring that voices are heard, ensuring that they have a voice and a say, at least so they know that their opinion is valued and being considered. And I think that that's where a lot of the change adoption rates fall, because a lot of the folks who are impacted by the change do not feel like they had any say, do not feel like they've had an opportunity to say how it may impact them or where the resistance may come from within their ranks. So I love that that is really the crux of everything you do when it comes to change, Darrell. And I know it's not easy to do that at all times, because that's taking a step back in a sense before you go and actually start doing the change work. But that's, to me, is what, if you're listening to this, what you need to take away is ensure that you take time to have representation at each level from the stakeholders who will be impacted, because those employees are the ones that are going to carry this thing out. And if
Yep.
they're carrying it out for them to be, in the instance of AI, a lot of them are being carried out and blindsided with layoffs, for example. So you really need to make sure you're taking that into account, that we are humans. We are not robots. We are not AI. We have feelings, emotions, and everything. So love that you're really bringing that humanity into the change initiatives and perspective.
Yeah, and I think Javon, the other piece too is like the reality is that you're not going to always get consensus. You just won't, right? But I think
Right.
having a solid understanding of what you're trying to accomplish and what is the value proposition you're trying to drive, and getting the input from key stakeholders helps you explain the whys and how you might need to address them to the various stakeholders that it impacts.
Absolutely. And, if you had a crystal ball, Darrell, if you had to bring out the crystal, what are some of the changes we should start preparing for? Industry agnostic. What should we be looking at and starting to prepare for?
Oh my, that's a big one. I mean, I know we. I think the big one we talked about already is just, I don't even want to say just one. I think it's really just the ability to be more nimble, because I think the pace of change is just going to continue to increase at a rapid pace. And, that could be from a variety of different areas, sources, variables. We are changing just so much faster than we ever have. And I don't think that's ever going to slow down. So it's,
Hmm.
how do we really make sure that we're spending the right time in the right space that's going to drive the right value for the organization or for your teams, is going to be crystal clear, because there is going to be super important, because you don't want to be changing just for the sake of change, but you want your change to be one that's meaningful and that it's intentional.
Hmm. And what are some of the skills from an HR perspective? What are some of the skills you recommend that employees at all levels should start looking to either upskill or reskill on right now?
Yeah, we talk a lot. My team and I talk a lot about a growth mindset, and I think
Hmm.
um, being intellectually curious always is important, right? Because there's so much, the avenues of being able to learn has grown tremendously, and I think we've got to constantly be in a state of kind of understanding, how do you improve our own skills, what else is out there, what's new, what should we be learning. I think if you kind of stay steady, you can easily become irrelevant. And I think having a growth mindset, kind of being intellectually curious, and I'm not saying go off and learn something crazy, but start with saying, as I think
Become
about
a
my
coder,
job,
right? As an AI
right? As
HR.
I think about my job in HR, one of the things I'm really focused on is, how do I continue to connect strategy to execution? Because that is something for me to continue to be effective in my role and to help lead teams. I need to continue to focus on that. And so I think if you take a humble approach to learning and continuing to grow, you always stay relevant, right? But what I see sometimes in some folks is that they've mastered a certain level of knowledge of technical expertise, but the reality is, in the next 3 to 5 years, that technical expertise may not be as relevant as it was today.
Absolutely. That is, it will not be. I'm just gonna go put it out there and say it won't be
I
as
was trying to be
relevant. You know,
nice.
I'm just gonna call it as I see it, Darrell. That's
Yeah,
how we do on this segment. But what I will say is I agree wholeheartedly, and I love that you mentioned the term strategy. I feel like in essence that is what is going to differentiate those who really excel is they become strategists because the technical aspect is not as important these days because of technology moving at the speed that it's moving in. So I think that if we as humans are able to strategize, not just set goals, but literally strategize on how we carry things out. That's going to be the winner, the difference between those organizations that are still around in 10 years and playing at a high level and those organizations that start to phase out. And we're seeing it right now, actually. We're seeing a lot
yeah,
of organizations who were billion-dollar companies going bankrupt or being acquired in all industries. So it's something that we really have to, take heed of because if you're one of those leaders who try to do things the old way, it's not going to work, and you're going to drag your company down with you.
yeah. And Javon, I think the other piece that's, I'm going to be real human for a moment, that's equally, if not more important, is I think for me, we have to be self aware, right? We have to really be in tune with ourselves and what we need. Because if you think about it, the pace of change is increasing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's lots of change that's happening, right? There are competing pressures personally, professionally, and how do you, as a human being, find your way to stay centered and feed yourself, your soul, what you need to be ready to deliver at home and at work and wherever is important, right? Because that kind of mental well-being and how you show up is a direct correlation by self-awareness and how you are taking care of your mental capacity to be able to handle change. Does that make sense?
100%. I'm so glad you brought that up. That's like I have a five. We mentioned five whys. My five why framework talks about leading from the inside out, and the first thing is
Yeah.
always got to be taking care of you and checking
Mm.
in with yourself, because, like you said, the change. Life is hard for a lot of us because it's constantly changing. But when you
Yeah,
add the significant changes that are going on that we can't control a lot of times,
you can.
you just have to be able to stay flexible and adjust and really tap into you and center yourself and reground and be willing to, like you said, remain intellectually curious. That's going
Yeah.
to be the difference. Like Jeff Bezos says with Amazon, every day is what? What do you say? Every day is day one,
Yep.
right?
Well,
So we.
and I would characterize it as resilience, right? And
Mhm.
I share this a lot with personal close friends, and then even my team around just my daily routine of how do I get centered at the very beginning of the day. And I'm a big believer of how you start your day in your mind and how you're thinking really does have a direct correlation to how your day will occur. And so if you wake up in the morning like, oh my God, this is going to be an awful day, and da 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 da, versus really taking the time to center yourself and ready yourself to win as changes come, or the normal parts of your day, you have a very different mindset that really creates a level of resilience to tackle what you need to tackle.
Yeah, that is so important. And if you do not have a routine to prepare yourself for that day, if you don't allow yourself to slow down a bit before you jump into the fray, I recommend that you do so. I myself also have a routine that I follow, and one of the pieces of my routine is gratitude practice.
Yes,
Grateful
I'm a
to
big fan.
God, but also to yourself, right? Because a lot of times we are so go go go. We're high achievers. We look at what we fell short on instead of focusing on how far we've come. So we definitely need to make sure we're pouring into ourselves and allowing others to do the same for us as well.
Yeah,
Uh, so
and
I'm
Javon,
glad
I
you said
do.
that.
Yeah, and Javon, what I would also say, because I do want to connect this back to the topic of change
Mhm.
management, right? Because I'm a firm believer that if you are kind of grounded and centered in yourself and how you show up, it makes you more self-aware, of not only what you need to do, but it makes you also more cognizant of the key stakeholders around you and what might be necessary to really drive the most effective change and sustain it, because you're more in tune to what's happening, and you're it's not what just what people are seeing or saying, but you're seeing things that you need to see to be able to help
Right.
enable the right change or level the right strategies to make that change effective, if that makes sense.
No, it makes 100% sense. It's just, when you look at it through the lens of anxiety or frustration or stress or whatever you may go through without being able to ground yourself, you can't see all the options and opportunities, right? It kind of
That's right.
becomes more of a survival tactic than a thriving tactic, so to speak, to go from that fixed to the growth mindset standard. So I love that you said, for change to work, you really need to be able to see all the options and see and slow yourself down enough and be centered enough to say, am I looking at this from a healthy state? Am I optimized enough as a human to be able to see this thing not through the lens of fear or uncertainty, but through the lens of what's possible? So thank you for saying that.
You're welcome.
Awesome. So we're winding down here, Darrell. Thank you so much for sharing all your insight on change management done right from an HR perspective. I think it's really from everyone's perspective because you were hitting it. You were firing all cylinders today, man. But tell the people how they can connect with you.
Yeah, I'm a big LinkedIn fan, so you can certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way.
All right, all right. So if you're not looking at this, I'll type it in the chat. I'll just post his link so you can go ahead and connect with him and follow some of his insights. He shares amazing things on LinkedIn. So thank you so much once again, and to all that tuned in, the over 1,000 folks who have tuned in live with us. Thank you so much for being here on all platforms: LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And I look forward to the next discussion. Darrell, we're gonna have to do this again because I feel like we could have kept rolling for at least another hour.
I know 30 minutes goes by fast.
It goes fast, man. But we'll do it again and appreciate you
Awesome.
once again. And remember to follow him. And I'll see you all next time. And remember, until we see one another again, to keep ascending.